I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey. I was a Jersey girl, and I always wondered what was out beyond the gate. And so I think my curiosity led me in very dangerous ways. Sometimes I'm very grateful that I didn't get into more trouble.
That's Carroll Dunham. I'm Cara Duffy, and this is the Powerful Ladies Podcast.
As John Lewis would say, we're up to good trouble.
Yeah. the best kind of trouble to be in, for sure.
And, I don't know for you, but it's like post-COVID and now suddenly like these lots of crazy expeditions and, just trying to, holding on, surfing the waves.
Everybody is for sure ready to be going at light speed right now. Yeah. I am so honored to have you here today. When Kendra from my team and I went to Mountain Film this year, we were so excited to be sponsoring, and we go to hear incredible stories and to find new potential podcast guests. And when we got to attend the 3-part women's special showing with you and two other amazing powerhouses, we just kept looking at each other and smiling like, this is exactly what we came for. So thank you so much for being a yes to us and to our audience. But let's dive right in and tell everyone who you are, where you are in the world, and a few of the things that you're up to, because we could have a whole hour just listing the things that you do.
Oh, well, Cara, it was a real honor to be on that stage with other powerhouse women because honestly, I believe as an old anthropologist, like Margaret Mead said, that it's only a small group of committed women that can ever make any real and meaningful change on this world, or committed citizens, shall we say, but especially women. I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey. I was a Jersey girl, and I always wondered what was out beyond the gate. And so I think my curiosity led me in very dangerous ways. Sometimes I'm very grateful that I didn't get into more trouble. I ended up in Nepal and ended up for 30 years in Nepal and in Mongolia. And I was working with women and income generation and working up in rural areas. And really, I was just really looking at how can women have a little bit of a better life and a voice and say. And I was trying to gather voices. I remember spending time gathering manure one Christmas and taking manure to the prison in Nepal because at that time period, Nepal had one of the most draconian abortion rights rules in the world, next to Sudan at that time period. And so women had to take care of themselves in the prisons. And often it would be incest. Often they were attacked by even members that they'd married in young into families, and then their husband was down in India working. And so the best gift I could give them was manure. So I took them a whole tractor full of compost, and they wept because that was what they most needed just to be able to survive at that time. But as an anthropologist, I've gone from looking at women and wondering, I became very fascinated by traditional medicinal herbs and plants and how women not only it was their abortion herbs that they were using, but others that they were using for female health care, etc. And that led me then to help using herbs for income generation. So we would make soaps and oils and things like that. My mentor was a woman named Anita Roddick. She started a company called The Body Shop. Mm-hmm. She really was quite a firebrand. She really was the forefront of creating fair trade. So we would travel around the world and looking at what women were using traditionally on their skin and how we could have trade that could, impact rural communities right at source in remote parts of the world. So that was a large part of my life. I also, I lived in Nepal and I studied Buddhism, and I had a teacher. And I think in terms of resilience, Nepal has been through 30 really very rough years, not been a smooth romantic sailing. We've been through a Maoist insurgency, we've had earthquakes. And so I I feel very grateful for what I have learned from very
Hmm.
tough, strong, resilient mountain women, as well as I spent 20 summers up in Mongolia with
Hmm.
Mongolian yak herders. And these women who survive in minus 40 and
Hmm.
very different ways of being. So I feel very grateful that I've had a life where I've been able to see many ways of the possibilities of what it means to be human, how to make a meaningful and purposeful life. And there's not one script. And
There certainly is not. And I would love to go back to even 8-year-old you. Like, would 8-year-old you have imagined this is your life?
um, when I was 8 years old, I really I used to run away. I was very rebellious. And I remember I'd sneak out of my window and down. And like in the old days, we'd have a bandana.
Hmm.
I remember putting scrambled eggs once in my bandana. And I would go and I found this amazing tree down near the river in a creek. And, here
Hmm.
I was. I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey. And I had great solace in nature, when times were difficult or tough. I always felt most at home in nature, and it was a really profound solace for me. So I always knew nature would be a big part of my life, and I was really blessed because in Nepal we have those Himalayas, and I created a life where I knew I would start to be almost like an animal, or I'd shake or, need
Hmm.
mental health if I didn't have enough time outside. I needed to feel the sunshine. I needed to smell the earth. That was the greatest mental health for me. Like I kind of, as a young kid already, I was like, well, why does it have to be this way? You get up and then you have to go to a job and you spend most of your life at a job. And I was like, I think there has to
Yeah.
be something more. So
Hmm.
that was, I think, a very big um and that there has to be something beyond. I remember as a little kid reading National Geographic and seeing all
Yeah.
these I remember seeing yurts and when they had something and that really was a very powerful impact on me. And so yeah, I've worked with National Geographic now for about 20 years, and
Hmm.
National Geographic yeah, I think had very strong impact on me as a little girl. Yeah.
Me too. I mean, between National Geographic and Indiana Jones, I was like, that's the life I want. I want adventure. I want showing up in random new places. And it's been interesting to take all the things that have inspired me and be carving out my ridiculous journey. When you got to partner with National Geographic, were you like, oh my gosh, like I've been manifesting this since I was like, a kid. Like, were you so excited to become an official part of the magazine that you had been reading?
I was.
Hmm.
It was definitely like a dream come true. So how it happened was, so we're up. My husband, my partner, and I, we were up in far northwest Nepal, in an area called Humla, with a people called the Nyinba, the people of the Sunny Valley, and they traditionally one woman marries all the brothers in a family. And so it's called polyandry. So most people have heard of polygamy, where there's one man and many women, but not the opposite. And so I was very fascinated. How could that
Yeah.
work? We think it's hard enough to take care of one husband. How do you take care of many? And so having spent long periods of time there, and then we did films, and then National Geographic said, wow, could we do a film with you? And so that's
Hmm.
how it became. But I was always very, very interested in telling women's stories,
Hmm.
particularly, and voices that aren't always heard and that are rare and unusual. And so
Yeah.
we were able to tell the stories of many of our dear friends in Humla and what it was like at that time period to be married with many husbands. Since that time, with the Maoist revolution, many of the women ran off to join the Maoist revolution, and with new and other economic opportunities, because this was a system where all the brothers would contribute to the household, so they would become
Hmm.
much wealthier than their monogamous Hindu neighbors in nearby villages. So it was a way of survival, but when there were other economic opportunities came for them to survive, polyandry is, there's very, very little of it existing.
Hmm. So interesting. And how did you go from Princeton, New Jersey? I'm also born in New Jersey, from Princeton, New Jersey to Nepal. Like, How did that leap happen? Were you just like one day, like, I just bought a one-way ticket? Like, how did that happen?
Actually, it was I was at, so my story was, so I was studying anthropology at Princeton, and I'd sit there and I'd get lost in these old dusty books in the open stacks down there at Firestone
Yeah.
Library. And I would dream, I used to love to read all the great explorers, and
Yeah.
there's great, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Alexander David Neal. She was this
So good.
amazing French woman, and she went and she traveled all throughout Tibet. She was a very strong, independent woman.
Mhm.
And, there's a lot of great, Gertrude Bell, and there's a lot of great female explorers, and many of them had
Mhm.
also gone to the Himalayas. So I was supposed to go to Sri Lanka, actually, and I was supposed to study something called Sarvodi. I convinced Princeton that they really needed, I didn't want to study from books. I needed to learn from people. I needed to learn
Mhm.
from experience. And I wanted to go to study Sarvodia, which was an area, a place where um, they were actually, it was a Buddhist organization, but it was involved in activism. So I was very
Mhm.
interested in how contemplation and activism, how did that work together? How
Yeah.
could you contemplate and then be active in the world to change the world? And because I was experiencing a lot of activists as being very angry people, a lot of them,
Mhm.
I said they were coming from their anger, I felt, and I was like, wow, I'm not sure if the best source of change should come from there. So I was supposed
Mhm.
to go to Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, a war broke out and I couldn't go. And I had like 1 week, I had to decide. And I had a good friend across the way, and he had been in Sri Lanka. He'd also been in Nepal. And he said, got to go to Nepal. You're going to fall in love with this great guy named Tom Kelly. You should study Tibetan. So I went because it was the year of the women.
Mhm.
And I thought, and I explained, I was interested in women in development, but they threw me into a Buddhist nunnery. And so I had to learn the language at the nunnery. And so I was like, well, these women are doing development too. They're just doing inner
Mhm.
development. They're not doing outer development. So that really was a major pivot in my life and a
Mhm.
major shift by looking around me and saying, like, I had this idea and this plan, but then what I
Yeah.
was saw around me. And I have to tell you one quick little funny story, if you don't mind. It's a
Sure,
nunnery
please.
story, but so I'm in the Buddhist nunnery. I have this wonderful, sweet, wonderful, my roommate. She's an older, elderly Annie. She doesn't have any more teeth anymore. So she eats her tsampa, roast barley in her mouth. But we slept on these Tibetan carpets and they were just chock-a-block full of bed bugs and
Mhm.
fleas. And it was
Mhm.
just like I was just being ravaged to death. And so it's like, oh my gosh, I just can't do this anymore. So, as you know, in a Buddhist nunnery, you shouldn't kill things, not allowed to kill things. So I had to sneak some flea powder in, and I looked around. I was sure she wasn't around, my roommate. And I started dousing my rug with the flea powder. And unfortunately, she comes right in, and I'm caught totally red-handed potting this flea powder. And she goes, "Kare Garena, what are you doing?" And I go, I'm giving medicine to the fleas." And she says, "Well, what does it do?" And I said, "Well, it makes them go away." She's so great. "I need some too." I said, "No, no, 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 no. I'll do it. I'll do it." So I officially became the mass flea murderer at the monastery. So I'm quite sure I'll be reborn again as a flea because I was responsible for killing all the fleas in the carpets at the nunnery. Anyway, so then that's where I learned the language, and
Mhm.
and I became very, very interested because I met a lot of women, Western women also, who
Mhm.
had shaved their heads and become Tibetan Buddhist nuns. So
Mhm.
this was another form of adventures, right? I was going
Yeah.
off and leading expeditions up in the mountains. And also, we were doing a lot of medical expeditions. I later worked with the Upaya Foundation. We were doing medical expeditions up the mountains. But I was like, well, there's also inner expeditions, and there's
Yeah.
other ways you can. There's actually the Great Mountain. And years later, I did a film with someone named Wade Davis, another
Mhm.
fellow National Geographic explorer, and it was a series called Light at the Edge of the World, and it was called Tibetan Mind Sciences. And so I'm naughty and as a female producer, and I was like, well, I'm going to find a female hero for this story. So I asked my son-in-law, who was a Tibetan, he was actually his Bhutanese traditional doctor. married to my foster daughter. I raised 6 foster kids before I had my own children. And so Pema Bhuti was married to Amchi Sherab, a traditional Bhutanese a doctor, and they lived up in Khumbu in the Everest region. So I said, are there any really great Buddhist practitioners? And so he drew me on a napkin a map of Everest, a region. So most people look and they see all these amazing, great mountains and everything. And instead, this was a hermitus and hermit man. And he's like, well, there's, this man, he's way in here. He's been here for 10 years. There's this woman here. She's been hiding in the mountain crevices. So, and for the local
Yeah.
traditional Sherpas, those were the great heroes. Those were
Mm.
the real adventurers, because it's like, so, okay, we may think, wow, it's so amazing. You climb Everest. And I'm not saying that it's not a feat, though that's another
Mhm.
discussion we can talk about if you want to go into that deeply. But um, really, they said, the real mountains to climb are the mountains in our own minds. And so we found this Anitsampangawang. She was considered to be a realized nun. Her story was very similar to a very famous female saint in Tibet named her name was Yesit Tsogyal, who was considered in the 7th century. She was at age 4. She could read and write. I mean, try to find in the West a great hero that can read and write in the 7th century that was a female.
Yeah.
And so she also had been, all the men in Tibet wanted to marry her, and so she had to run into the wilderness. The king said, oh, well, I'll solve the problem. I'll marry her. And then the wildest, greatest saint in Tibet named Padmasambhava was the Buddha of transformation. He says, they have an amazing relationship. They fall madly in love. And this becomes the beginning of her great spiritual journey. And it ends up, she goes to Nepal and to Bhutan, and she writes. She's very important in Tibetan Buddhist mystical history and story. So this was this woman, Anit Sampangawang. She was very beautiful. She came from a very wealthy family, a Sherpa family. And all the men in the region wanted to marry her. And all she wanted to do was practice Buddhism, go internally inside herself and climb the great mountains inside herself and her being. And so it was going to be the men had all come and they'd surrounded her hermitage, which was just below Tengboche Monastery. Anybody who's ever gone up to Everest in to the Everest region, on the way towards Dingboche, there's a little nunnery, and I was down in there. And she realized, so she goes out to the crapper and she looks down the shitter hole, and excuse me, and she looks down and she says, that's my path to freedom. So because in the morning they were going to take her away, she was going to have to marry this big wealthy man. And she climbs in her nightie down the very steep mountainside that's covered with shit, but it's frozen shit at least, because and then she crawls up the mountain, up to Tengboche. She knocks on the door in the middle of the night. Tengboche, she's like, you're a woman. You're not supposed to be in the monastery tonight. And she says, help, all I want to do is study Buddhism, please. She says, well, I can't let you hear, but I'll let Dorji take you up and over the Nangpala Pass, and you can go up into Tibet and study up there with this Lama. So she studied. She gained realization. She went back and was called Tsetsam Ani, which means lifelong retreatant. So I so my brother, my son-in-law had been one of her students. She had then, after being in lifelong retreat, she would open the door just a little bit here and just poke out her little face. So all the Sherpas, before they would go on up to Mount Everest, would always go and get the blessings of Tsetsam Ani. So we went to go do a film, and I had a girlfriend who lived up there. She said, there's no way you're going to get an interview with Tsetsam Ani, because she won't, she never let anyone take her picture or anything. You must have gotten it wrong. So I run up there. She opens the door and she says, I have been waiting for you. I had a dream about you. And then I remembered that on my very first time I'd ever gone up to Khumbu, I had gotten up early at 6 a.m. There'd been a woman with beautiful silver braids, and she was feeding birds. She was sitting down cross-legged in a forest, feeding birds, and birds were lighting on her. They were on her shoulders. They were in her lap, because she was tossing out some bird feed all around as she was singing her mantras, and it had profound impact for me. So I only knew in that moment she was right across from Tsetsam Ani's where I would find Setsam Ani, who'd been there all that time. And she was also the grandmother of my foster daughter, Pema Bhuti. And I never knew that. It was very
That's
powerful. So there's a little
yes.
bit of magic up in the mountains. And I,
Yeah. I have chills. That story, it was amazing that to me, it's a sign that we're on the path that we're supposed to be when there's all of these magical coincidences and overlaps, and it all starts making sense as we keep going down the path. You seem to be so centered and outward looking, but from decision making from you. You don't seem to be very influenced from others. Is that how you've always been, or is that a myth? Is that my illusion from the outside? Like, you seem so directive with where you're making life choices, but which isn't the norm for most people. Most people, it's very taking in from everyone else and being influenced in that capacity.
I would not say that I'm not influenced by people, because I am very much,
Yeah.
and by my environment. But I will say, how do I explain this? So in Buddhist practice, there's one really beautiful practice where the completion stage practices where you visualize really beautiful magical worlds inside yourself. And
Mhm.
there are many kinds of Buddhism all over the world. And the Buddhism of the Himalayas, Vajrayana Buddhism, has a lot of visualizations. It's very,
Mhm.
you create like very or elaborate movies in your heads or whatever. And fortunately, and there are times where there's formless meditation and none,
Mhm.
but at this stage, and you create these beautiful worlds inside yourself. So I would just ask you or
Mhm.
anyone who's listening, to imagine that world for yourself. What
Mhm.
would it look like? What would be that ecosystem? What kind of
Mhm.
trees would be in there? Is it a lake? Is it a river? Is it an ocean? Is it a mountain? Is it a
Yeah.
desert? What is the ecosystem? Or maybe some people are more safe. And what is the home? What is
Mhm.
like perfect home? And what is it like? And what are the sounds? What are the birds? What variety is there that are there? What kind of animals are there? The sounds, the taste, the smells, and you kind of create that and you work on
Mhm.
that. It's a very beautiful, it's a very powerful, it's very healing uh, thing or a way to do. So, um, I would not say that you could say I'm just a stubborn, bullheaded Aries, probably, and I like would, barrel with my horns and break all the china, and, because, I've made many, many mistakes, and I have my how do you say my knee I have definitely scuffed my knees along my ways with my idealism too,
Mhm.
dangerous sometimes. And so learning to listen to others is really actually very, very important. And
Mhm.
but to also kind of go have a deep, intimate relationship with yourself.
Mhm.
So by creating these beautiful spaces inside ourselves, but it really, I think the tragedy of modern life often can be we just try to fill our everything. And we're
Yeah.
very scared of open spaces or even internal spaces. And of even like, because maybe emotions may arise in that time,
Mhm.
uncomfortable feelings and difficult feelings or tension or sadness or stress. And so how do we learn, like in our bodies with breath,
Yeah.
you know, to actually have a very intimate relationship with ourselves. And if we can have an
Mhm.
intimate relationship with ourselves and enjoy it, like it tastes sweet, like our own being is, that
Yeah.
we actually enjoy being alone, quiet out in the forest, hear the river go in silence. If we can really have comfort with that, I
Mhm.
think good decisions can arise from that.
Yeah.
But that's
Do
me. Everybody's
you,
different.
when you look at your journey so far, are there moments when you have like like there was my life before Tibet and here's my life after Tibet? Like, what are
Oh.
some key markers that just shifted everything that you thought the world was, let alone where you were going?
Well, I always say for me, when I first got to Nepal, it was like Dorothy and Wizard of Oz, and my life went from black and white to
Mhm.
color. I mean, just the sheer chaos of Kathmandu. If
Yeah.
anyone's ever been there, it's total madness, but somehow it still flows. The traffic, the sounds, the people, the chaos.
Mhm.
Life is in the streets, and you see, dead bodies, and children are laughing and playing, and women are breastfeeding, and everything's out in the open. Nothing's
Mhm.
behind closed doors that way. So I know that yeah, for me there was, obviously going to Nepal was a very major
Mhm.
lifetime. I'll tell you a story though. So I I had friends that I had trusted, and they always say never go into business with friends, but I don't listen sometimes, as I said, and that's and so I had a time in my life where sort of all my outer constructs were completely dissolved. And I'll tell you the
Mhm.
story.
Mhm.
It's a little bit hokey dokey, but that's what I am. So I had a wonderful, crazy teacher, and he's a yoga teacher. And this is down in South India, in near Karnataka. There's jungles. It's the Western Ghats. It's actually it was once a part of Ganawanda land. So it's very unique,
Cool.
ancient, primeval palms, and it's the largest concentration of what we know as Shakti peats or Devi peats. That means ancient, sacred, feminine power spots for
Hmm.
Indians on the planet. For Indians, those ancient early sites are all very concentrated in this area. So there is a wonderful, very powerful temple called Mukambika or Ma, and it's sort of three goddesses in one. And so I had done practice there, and they said, well, you really have to go up and go off alone into the forest and jungle, and obviously there's big pythons and lots of scary animals. And it's where they would actually go for diamonds and diamond mining. So there were these big holes. So I thought instead of finding a cave, I found this thing. I wasn't sure if there was like big snakes or there were spiders.
Mhm.
And anyway, so I go down in there, and I foolishly is like thinking, I'm so brave and strong. And I'm like, Kali Ma. So Kali, as many of you may know in the Hindu tradition, she's the goddess of time, but she's also the destroyer. So she destroys. But as we all know, like winter has to be destroyed for spring to come.
Mhm.
Patriarchy has to dissolve for new systems to emerge.
Mhm.
Petroleum, post-petroleum, we have to consider new ways of how we're going to be. So sometimes old
Mhm.
structures that are outmoded have to die for new things
Mhm.
to come, and that is the nature of being. So I said, Kalima, do with whatever you will with me. I'm yours. Be careful what you ask for, girl.
Yeah.
So I literally less than a week, um, you know, all sort of relationships where I had had deep trust, everything suddenly just eroded and collapsed, and my livelihoods collapsed, and anything that sort of so-called solid structures, outer structures of my
Mhm.
life, all dissolved. So I had to crawl up to Mongolia. And so here's Mongolia. So we often will say, like India, we would go in the winters and do big yoga retreats and things, and it's all full of very soft and sweet
Mhm.
energetically. And Kathmandu, we used to tease is sort of tantric with black and light and dark, where it's almost like putting your finger into a electric socket. I mean,
Yeah.
it's powerful energy, good, bad, and ugly, and either you scream and run
Mhm.
away, or you go, wow, there's something very powerful in energetically of the land. Or they call Talaju's Valley. So Kathmandu is traditionally named after the goddess Talaju. So
Mhm.
her valley is traditionally considered a womb in sacred geography. So all this has happened, and a friend says, well, come on up to Mongolia. I have a camp up here. And so I literally sort of crawl up, and I'm broken. Like I'm inside, like my
Mhm.
faith in other humans is kind of broken, kind of broken. And it was the horse. It was um, getting on a horse,
Mhm.
and there are no fences. And we were out with I was a bunch of us, and a big clouds in the far off. And I love medicinal plants. So I was like looking and gathering the medicinal plants, and kind of lost. I was on the horse, but I was actually looking down.
Yeah.
And and then this a nomad comes running up, and in Mongolian, he's very angry with me, and he's basically saying, you dumb idiot, you were supposed to have gone with the others. They're all in a van, they've gone back. I've got all their empty horses. The storm is coming in, the lightning's coming
Mhm.
in, and we're going to have to book our way home. So when he bumps on the back of a horse, and we're in full gallop with the rain and lightning. And I had to hold on for dear life, and I was very terrified. Um,
Mhm.
and when I got off that, after 30 kilometers like that of in the rain at full, I got off in a delirious state because I had sort of like gone through fear to the other
Mhm.
side, and I had no fear anymore. And I was so grateful to the horse. So
Mhm.
in Mongolia, they have a term, it's called himor, means wind horse. Tibetan, we say lungta, they say himor. And they always say, like, Genghis Khan had a lot of humor because he was decisive. He was decisive. So they say indecisive is when you have a low humor. Your wind horse
Mm.
is low. But if you're like, I'm going to go here direction, we go to the Balkans tomorrow, it means your wind horse is strong and the vitality.
Mm.
So the raw elements of Mongolia is strong. Like
Mhm.
you either Mongol people are, they live through minus 45, and then my husband's in right now in the Gobi, it can be 110.
Yeah.
And they're strong and they're tough and resilient because they have a little really, and it's the elements. It's the
Mhm.
elements that give you that vitality by being out there. It's pouring rain, and his Westerners were like, wait, we need shelter. And they're like, it's just water dripping down my face. What's the
Yeah.
problem? And you have a different relationship with
Yeah.
the elements in that. So I'm very, very grateful and feel very blessed. Those are some very strong turning points in my life.
I did a road trip with two friends through Mongolia, and it was one of the best adventures I've ever had. And just I didn't know what to expect showing up besides a few videos of people on the steppe, and that was it. And to see how diverse the landscape is in Mongolia was really surprising. Like it felt almost like traveling in a road trip through America,
Yeah.
of places that looked like Colorado and places that looked like Ireland and green and waterfalls and the desert. That, like, it was such a variety of landscape in such a more condensed space. And the like seeing wild horses and the all the space that there is, everyone was just so nice as well, which I think we often say as Westerners to any place that feels magical to us. But truly everybody was like, sure, what do you need? Not a big deal. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was a transforming space. And I keep telling people, like, go see it, go explore what's happening there. And I don't know who's taking me up on it yet, but it really was one of the most magical places I've been, and so thankful that we randomly decided to take that trip between both of us having work trips in other parts of Asia. Hmm.
Well, come back. There'll be Aira,
Yeah.
Bear's Milk. So we have worked with we have Mongol nomad partners in the Bunkan
Hmm.
Valley, in Narkhangai,
Yeah.
Setserdig, and we've been leading horse pilgrimages there. And I raised my children as little,
Hmm.
so from little kids, and I'm so grateful to Mongolia and Mongolians.
Hmm.
They gave my boys, we talk about women and women's rights, but
Hmm.
I also believe as a mom, if you can raise men who know how to love
Yeah.
women and treat women right, I don't know if I can create world peace, but at least if I can, have influence to have, young men that are respectful women, that's a huge thing. And so in Mongolia, like my boys had go in the nadoms with the Mongol boys, and they were tough, little boys, they'd like want to shove them off for these little white boys in here. And be on these half wild horses, and full gallop, with and no saddle, nothing.
Hmm.
And they'd be, at full gallop for 15 kilometers, and some of them up and down and steep hills. And I could tell you a lot of stories of some wild shamans, and so
Hmm.
yeah, anyone wants to come and contact me if you want to come up and
Yeah.
do some horse riding, because it's also the horse is a way of truly and genuinely finding it's like another way
Mhm.
to create a deep relationship with yourself. The horse is a
Yeah.
great tool or method to
Yeah.
recognize our own fears, and to go to some deeper places. They've been a great companion species for humans for at least 6,000 years.
Well, I think that's actually a great segue into what do you think powerful and ladies mean? And does the definition change when those words are put together for you?
Oh, thank you. Wow. I've met a lot of powerful women in my
Yeah.
life. And just to stay on the Mongol theme,
Mm-hmm.
um, Mongolia only has, like, they don't have this in Tibet, but they have a tradition of reincarnated women who are considered to be Taras. And Tara is considered to be like a goddess savior, but they're living, embodying that element or tradition. And men really respect and honor that. And we did a film once on Narandelik. And she had 12 sons, and they treated, I was like, gosh, I think I want to be a goddess, because if I get my sons to treat me like that, she was just amazing. And so when communism collapsed in Mongolia, she was the very first to be brave enough to say, because they didn't know, is it going to last? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
this will be a short period and then it'll go back to communism. And
Yep.
she's like, no, I am a Buddhist woman leader. And she went right down to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and she had visions. She was very, visionary, and she would, in her visions, go ride black horses off to these other horse heavens that in traditional Mongolian shamanism. And she had a vision of creating a forest, which she did then. So in like way up, this is in
Mm-hmm.
far western Mongolia, she planted a forest, very great
Crazy.
visionary. So powerful women. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I feel so blessed to have met many powerful women. And then just to give on the other side. So in growing,
Mm-hmm.
spending 30 years in Nepal, starting many years ago, early years, interviewed and spent a lot of time with a lot of the ex-Kumaris. So Nepal has a
Mm-hmm.
tradition of living goddesses, and it's complex. So, these are little girls that were identified very young, prepubescent, and they're considered to be the incarnation of the goddess Talaju. But they're considered to have so much power that, like, there was a sad story. One of the ladies told us how when she was a child, there was a man and he came very sick. Probably, sounds like he probably had tuberculosis. He was coughing a lot, but he
Mm-hmm.
prostrated in front of her, and a little spittle accidentally dropped on her toe, and everyone in the room went, and even him, he looked at her horrified, his eyes wide open. And the next day he died. And she was so terrified that maybe she, the goddess,
Mm-hmm.
I have this goddess in me. Maybe I
Yeah.
killed this man. Right. So the raw fierce power of, that. And so when we look at patriarchy, et cetera, a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
will say, well, they're just trying to contain that. Men are very, very terrified of that sheer, what in Hindu
Yeah.
terminology we call Shakti, is such a radiant, powerful source. It's the origin of all life that women have within them, of all, even me as an old biddy, possible. I mean, I will still have that power, and that many folks will tremble at the notion
Mm-hmm.
of powerful women. And women have been burned at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
Midwives, which is the birth and that magic, but then the fear or the terror
Mm-hmm.
of strong women. And then what's very painful is to see when we ourselves even buy into the patriarchy, so to speak, and then clamp
Yep.
ourselves down and
Mm-hmm.
deny our own power. And at the same time, like, I'm not one of those people that just think, oh, I love Barbie, by the way. I don't know if anybody's
Yeah.
seen it or not. I loved it. And
It's so good.
I love when it's like, well, we're not really totally ready. We'll keep the Supreme Court all women at this time.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the best lines there. But um, and to be incarnate in a woman's body. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we have a lot of traditional Buddhist sayings where, actually we have more potential for enlightenment in a woman's body than a man, even, because we have
Interesting.
space and we have that womb. And so we have that wisdom and we have compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm not sure that personally, I don't think gender is really related to compassion because,
Mm,
women can be cruel and horrible. Anyone who knows, I don't know if anyone's ever read any
yeah.
Margaret Atwood, she's done a great job at like,
Yeah.
how horrific women can be to each other in middle school, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And now with social media, with girls, it can be, it can be very, we can be very, just as horrific to each other. So power without compassion, without
Mm-hmm.
kindness, can be dangerous. That's all.
Yeah. When you look at what's coming up for you in the next year, what are you excited about?
Oh gosh. I got a lot happening. So in this moment, you're catching me, and I am about to go on a big journey with National Geographic, and we'll be going to Brazil. And it's very exciting because the indigenous peoples, when we talk about grandma, and I still can't believe I'm fighting for this thing, when we realize how indigenous peoples are really the stewards of the planet, how 80% of the greatest biodiversity on the planet is in places where
Mm-hmm.
indigenous peoples have left and held on to those pieces, and they have to fight all the time to keep those lands from to be protected, and Brazil is one of those places. And
Yep.
very good news with the current president. They've just all met, all of the tribal leaders, and it's looking like even for larger than Brazil, for regionally, on trying to protect the rainforest, which is like a
Mm-hmm.
lung of our planet, that
Yeah.
Earth. So, and I'll be going from there to Borneo. I'm very excited. Um, and other place and which is just so rich in biodiversity and also
Mm-hmm.
very rich in indigenous peoples. We'll be seeing lots of different kinds of elephants on this trip, from the
Cool.
elephants to the domesticated elephant, which in Asia, what's fascinating when we look at elephants compared to then in Africa, where we have the
Mm-hmm.
large African elephant, is what we don't think about is, so with the loss of biodiversity on this planet, with the mass extinction that has gone on of animals in my lifetime, most people don't realize that over 85% of all mammals on this planet are us humans and our domesticated animals. So as someone who spent 20 years living with nomads in Mongolia, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very, very fascinated by our human relationship to animals, from microbes to yaks. And when we look, so like with the domesticated elephant in Asia, the challenges are like during COVID in Thailand, there was, without tourists, there was nobody
Mm-hmm.
to even feed the elephants, because we're like, look, we don't need them anymore. We're not logging with them anymore. We don't need them. But that's a 3,000-year-old relationship humans have had
Mm-hmm.
with those animals. So I'm very excited for that trip.
Yeah.
I'm very excited. I'm heading off with another fabulous powerhouse woman who I strongly recommend you
Yeah.
interview in the future, Christine Amor Lavar. Um, and we're going to be going off into the Gobi. That'll be in March. It's
Cool.
-45 to go to the Thousand Camel Festival. Come along if you like, Cara. Come join
Yeah.
us. It takes a little bit of madness. I'm really in love with Bactrian camels. They're like
Mm-hmm.
the Mack trucks of the Silk Road historically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, humans had, these are 3,000-year-old relationships, and they're not like those grumpy dromedaries, the one humped.
Yep.
These are like the Cadillacs of camels because they're big and fuzzy and furry. And again, what happens as ways of living change, and our humans, these animals that we relied on to live with, and Mongols, as I know, Cara, like the weeping
Yeah.
camel, when, say, a baby camel won't milk from its mother, they have songs that they'll sing, humans sing, that actually will
Yeah.
help the mother camel, milk will drop, and so it can nurse, so the baby can nurse and live. And so the humans and the animals are very, very close and very intimate. And I think you become a different kind of human. Like the Mongols think, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a herd, you're actually only half human. So,
So beautiful.
different
Mm-hmm.
kind of human. So I'm busy working on a book project, and so I run a nonprofit foundation with a fellow
Mm-hmm.
National Geographic explorer. She's a marine biologist named Tierney Tees.
Mhm.
Absolutely unbelievable, extraordinary woman. And we're, asking the question, what could we wear in a post-petroleum future? And so we have been, it was our COVID mental health project, and we
Yep. Mhm.
been interviewing people all over the world, indigenous communities, not only looking at the common, like you would think,
Yep.
oh, we're such a weird species. How did we even begin to wear clothes in the first place?
Yep.
We lost our hair, and then, from after skins, and we call them the big five because mostly for most of human history, we've been wearing cotton, wool, silk, hemp, and linen. And
Mhm.
then they're the uncommon. So we've been exploring and finding, lotus fibers in Cambodia and bark cloth in Uganda and musk ox in Alaska and, pineapple with in the Philippines and, these extraordinary other kinds of fibers that humans have been using and then talking with cutting edge scientists who are
Mhm.
creating using microbes, and then the feedstock is really fascinating. They're
Mhm.
leftover. There's a company in Mexico. They're using the fruit waste left after you've made fruit juice. They're using
Mhm.
agricultural waste. Sometimes they're even using carbon waste left actually from factories as we're trying to
Yeah.
create the new.
Cool.
So the future of the world, as we ask, is going to be in terms of food, clothing, and shelter because of this huge loss of biodiversity, the loss
Mhm.
of habitat loss of many of our animals. It's going to food. So we have to decide, what are we going to wear, or are we going to feed ourselves? A lot of people think the
Mhm.
future will be eating bugs. So I had such a fabulous time. Just a year ago, I was up in Assam, and I was
Mhm.
chasing after two extraordinary varieties of moths. So one is the Erie silk moth, and it is also known as a himsa, or because it's true, you don't have to boil the larvae to make silk because it has a
Mm.
unique kind of cocoon and you can take the larvae out. But
Oh.
since the second century, when as the tribal peoples of the Assamese forests have been raising and rearing the Erie, they take them out and they eat them for protein. And so it's actually quite amazing because then people come in and say, well, we need more and more. And they say, well, I can't eat that much. I can eat this much. So I'll only grow this much. So it's very much in
Mhm.
relationship. And they eat totally different kinds of tree leaves, not the
Mhm.
mulberry as we think of with the Bombex mori. And then there
Yeah.
is the Muga silk, which is the most expensive silk found on this
Mhm.
planet. And it creates this magnificent golden thread. And it's absolutely extraordinary. But the challenge is that just like humans, these silkworms are very sensitive to temperature change. So we're
Yeah.
trying to work with geneticists as well, and looking on, not only do we have to figure out how we're going to adapt with climate change and the temp, and is also all of the different animals that we co-live with and coexist with. But I'm absolutely, I have a very funny quick
Yep.
story, but I
Mhm.
accidentally, so one of the farmers, he said, here, and he gave me a whole big pile of the cocoons. And I thought, oh, great, because it's absolutely just mystical and magical to watch them spin
Mhm.
and make the cocoons. It's just amazing. But so he gave me that, and I thought, oh, this will be great. I can use them for educational. We have exhibitions all over. And so I put it in a plastic bag, didn't think of anything, flew to Kathmandu, didn't think of it, flew home, didn't think of anything. And I opened it up and I said to Tierney, my partner, I said, oh my God, these smell really bad. She said, just pop them in the oven at 350 and, sterilize them and send them to me. So a few days went by. I opened the bag, and an enormous, beautiful, gorgeous Erie moth silk fluttered out. I'm every custom officer's, nightmare. And but I was like, and then I didn't, and then I was like, come on, I wanted the other, I had wanted the other cocoons, and I was all
Mhm.
alone. My husband wasn't around, and so I had the most profound. It lived. It was obviously probably a male. It lived for about 6 days, and he must have said, "Where am I? I'm not in the Indo-Brahmaputra ecosystem anymore." But I can tell you that my emotional feeling, like as a
Mhm.
You can even bond to insects. And so I was down in Oaxaca where we were looking after wild silks. They're wild cottons that they've been growing since Aztec times that doesn't need any water. They don't need to
Whoa.
irrigate. It's forest
Yeah.
cotton. And they also, though, they grow Bombax morai that the
Mhm.
Spaniards brought over, and the women say, "Oh, we do it at home. We feed our worms before we feed our children, so they're part of the family." So deep, interconnected, multi-species, interspecies relationships is something that I'm very interested in right now.
Well, I love that. So I have 3 rapid questions for you to wrap up today so we can get you back to your busy life. The first is we ask everyone on the podcast where they put themselves in the powerful lady scale. If 0 is an average everyday human and 10 is the most powerful lady you can imagine, where would you score yourself today and on an average day?
Oh, that's so interesting. So, first of all, obviously, there's many kinds of power.
Yeah.
So, if I was to talk about internal power, spiritual power, let's just be nice and give ourselves a 5 in between.
Okay,
That's a
perfect.
nice, balanced place to be. So there's room to grow, but there's been a little bit of growth. Um, I think what I would love to see for myself is the power. I really do believe that only through collaboration, through connection with other powerful women, we are stronger. That the Genghis Khan, his mother said to him, "Now look, you brothers stop fighting and you be like arrows. And, like if you're a single arrow, I can just break you over my knee. But
Mhm.
if you're 5 arrows together, I can't break you." And so I would hope to connect with other powerful women, and then I'm sure I could make it up to a 10. But we can only do it together.
Yeah,
Mm.
agreed. Agreed. For everybody who wants to connect, support you, go on an exhibition, learn about all the fabrics that you and Tierney are finding, where can they do that? Where can they connect and follow?
Absolutely. We have a website called Around the World in 80 Fabrics. We also have Instagram. Find us on Instagram, or they're Around the World in 80 Fabrics. And yeah, please come find us and join our journey. And we
Mhm.
love makers. We love to profile women. We like to try to support other women and
Mhm.
in their process and in their journey, and especially around textiles and the creation. We're in a material revolution right now, so we ask you to come and
Yes.
join us.
Love that. The last question we've been asking everyone this year is what can we create for you? What are you trying to manifest? What's on your wish list? This is a powerful, connected community. What do you need? How can we help?
Well, right now we are in a fundraising
Hmm.
process right now, and we're trying to raise funds because we have this extraordinary collection that we've gathered of
Hmm.
unique fabrics from all over the world and unique stories, and we're looking to try to have some exhibitions. And
Hmm.
so, if anyone wants to come along and to join us in supporting that, we'd be really, really grateful. And even it doesn't matter tiny small elements, but we also love
Hmm.
stories, and
Yeah.
we really want to connect the world and connect women through textiles to transform the world and understand the ecosystems and the natural history of where our fabrics come from.
Well, it has been such a pleasure to get this hour with you. We could definitely talk for hours more. So hopefully we'll have you back one day. But thank you so much for your time and who you are in the world and the inspiration that you are to me, to Kendra, and everyone who's now, I'm sure, a huge fan after listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Cara.
Yeah.
Thank you, and all your listeners. Thank you.
All the links to connect with Carroll, her expeditions, and around the world in 80 fabrics are in our show notes at thepowerfulladies.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening and leave us a rating and review. Come join us on Instagram at Powerful Ladies and connect directly with me at caraduffy.com or cara_Duffy on Instagram. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, I hope you're taking on being powerful in your life. Go be awesome and up to something you love.